Hello, my name is Obari Gomba. I describe myself essentially as a writer. I write poetry, I write plays, I write essays, and I'm trying to diversify into the writing of fiction and take that a lot more seriously in the years ahead. I am also a university lecturer, artist, literature, and creative writing at University of Port Harcourt in the Department of English Studies. And I guess that that is a job description that is particularly relevant to the conversation that we're about to have. We want to look at what it takes to become a published poet. But to get to that point, it's better for us to start from the basic. Who is a poet? A poet is anyone who writes poetry. However, the attempt at writing poetry can be good and can be bad. So the deepening of craft that is required of someone who is going to emerge as a good poet comes from practice. And practice is a product of passion, dedication, and commitment, which will also include the presence of mind that enables the aspiring artist to train and retrain, to review his or her capacity and look for improvements where it's necessary. Because poetry is literature and words are the basic language, words are the basic blocks with which we build literature. It requires that anybody who is going to create poetry or any other form of literature must be someone who takes the mastery of language seriously. And that is where it begins. Literature cannot exist without existing as it is shaped by language, as it is presented by language. So that if you're going to be a poet, you must pay close attention to linguistic competence. If you're writing in French, you need a measure of proficiency in the language. If you're writing in English, if you're writing in Igbo, in whatever language that you choose to write poetry in, even if it's pidgin, Nigerian pidgin, you must have proficiency in that language. And proficiency is not an instantaneous thing. It comes with constant learning, constant openness, and the capacity to constantly challenge yourself to know more and to be more in order to enhance your capacity to use language. And then when we move from there, we now look at the other features that shape uh, the poetic process. For instance, if you're going to create poetry, do you understand what a form of poetry is? What is it that distinguishes poetry from prose? What is it that distinguishes from drama? What are the features, are the elements that we enhance the quality, the aesthetics of your poem? This goes beyond uh, classroom exercise or classroom knowledge or theoretical knowledge. I'm talking about practice now. And I'm talking about an individual's capacity to understand what it takes. And that's why a writer or a poet cannot be an ignorant person. I mean, anybody, a thief, a robber, a politician, a priest can be a writer, but an ignorant person cannot be a writer, cannot be a poet, because you have to understand what you intend to create. It's within every creative process. What you do not know, you do not create, because there is no accidental poem. The creation of poetry is a deliberate process, an intentional process, it's a purposeful process. So you have to set from the word go with a clear intention to create a poem. In the process of creating the poem, there can be shifts, measures of control that enable you to adapt to subject matter and form. But you know essentially from the beginning that what you are setting out to create, it's poetry. Some persons are knowledgeable enough to know the kind of poetry that they want to create. It's a sonnet, is it lyric, is it epic, is it ballad? But even if you do not have all those detailed knowledge, which sound to many persons like academic knowledge, you should at least know that what you intend to do is to structure your thought and verse in a way that is aesthetic, in a way that is musical, in a way that will endure as art and not rant. How do you get to this point? I'm going to say it from the way I started. Many years ago, I started to write poetry, and the first collection that I published was a collection called Pearls of the Mangrove. That collection has gone through 6 editions. So what have I been doing over this period is to constantly look at those poems, and each time I look at them, I see that there's a need for me to add more poems to that collection or tweak a poem here and there. And so that's my most protean collection so far. What it simply means is that to become a poet, you have to start. And nobody really starts ready. because the capacity to be a good poet comes on the job. As you constantly exert yourself and know more and practice, you get better from a position of knowledge, and from your own personal discipline and commitment to the craft, you get better. And that's why if you're a poet who believes that you're ready-made and you do not have any room for improvement, then you're dead on arrival. Because the truth is that you're going to stifle your own capacity to constantly regenerate itself and expand itself and become better and better with each year as you develop through time. So, but it's important at the point where you're beginning to know that if you do not start, you cannot finish. It's important to start. If I had waited many years ago to be very, very knowledgeable before I started writing poetry, I probably would not have been a poet. It was that commitment to let my passion go, to plant my passion, to invest my passion in creativity that I have developed through the years. So you start. You you confront the blank page, if it is a sheet of paper. You confront the blank page on your computer. You confront the blank page on your phone for those who write on their phones. And then there's a reason why the word draft is in the English language, because any work that is worth its salt must go through draft to the final product. And that's why when I meet people who tell me that they wrote a poem in 5 minutes, in a way, I am shocked, because the truth is that the inspiration that makes you write a poem can actually come in 5 seconds. But the creative process itself is something that requires that you constantly evaluate what you have produced. So that when you produce that first draft, if it is important to you, then you must look at it again, because nothing that is really important to us is done once. For instance, food is important. You can't eat all your food in one day and say, I've eaten for a lifetime. You have to constantly do it. Same thing with your health care. If you're in love, you don't love one person once and say, okay, fine, I've loved you for the whole of life of the life of my lifetime. You constantly have to work on it, because there'll be challenges and situations and circumstances that will require that you show that you are actually in love. And that is the same thing with the creative process. A creative person who produces one draft and assumes that that draft is created by God should have the humility to know that even God creates hunchbacks, you know, and that doesn't make God something less than God. So that discipline to look at your art, look at your draft, work through many, many drafts if it is necessary to get at the best that you can possibly produce is important uh, for the creative process. That leads me to an idea that I like talking about, which is the value of self-editing for the writer, for the poet. Any writer that does not have the capacity to reflect on his or her work is not going to grow. No, that writer is not going to grow. The writers that we grow are writers that, without defeating or their creative capacity, because there's a self-reflection that is destructive, that makes you undermine your own capacity to move forward, because you define each time you reflect on yourself, you define yourself as a failure instead of re-evaluating your capacity to improve on yourself. So it is not the definition of self as failure, the allowance of self to slip into despair, okay, or dysfunction that I'm talking about. It is that presence of mind that enables you as a creative person to know that I have to constantly look at myself and I have to constantly look at my art, and that my art is worthy of that kind of self-reflection and self-evaluation. That's what is important, because when you get to that point, you have the capacity to edit your work first. You are your own first editor. Every writer must have that presence of mind to be his or her own self-editor. You cross your T's, you take out words that do not sit well, you alter expressions. And if you request that you take out entire stanzas, you take out those stanzas. You retool the work generally if it is required that you retool the work. Sometimes you have 2 or 3 versions to the work, and it's difficult for you to decide which of the version is better. Give it time. You don't have if you feel that you cannot take that decision, allow those 3 versions to exist in your closet. Give them time and allow yourself to come to a conclusion, and look at the strong elements of all those versions and see if you can bring them together, or if you can decide to trash 1 or 2 of the versions and arrive as a single one. Those things are the things, that's the kind of presence of mind that is required of creative people. But you see, self-editing is alone is not enough. And that's why any person who is going to be good at creativity must have a feedback mechanism from trusted people. Primary support system that a writer has is the company that the writer keeps. And sometimes the office of the first reader is a powerful office. And the first reader can be your girlfriend or your brother or your sister or your wife or your husband or your teacher, okay, or somebody that you think very highly of, who can look at this work at the first instance and tell you, this is what I think. Now, my own first readers are not essentially or solely people who have training in literature or English. In fact, I like the viewpoints of people who don't have literary training. Just people who are coming to the poem as just readers, just people who want to appreciate poetry. I like to get the viewpoints of those people so that I don't end up creating art that is just art for academics. But at the same time, I also look for that multiplicity of viewpoints. So when I'm looking out for copy editors, I don't look out for only one copy editor. Oh yes, it has cost implication, but I don't do that. I look out for as many copy editors as possible. And copy editing is a very, very tricky affair. It's not every person who has a degree in English that will work as a good copy editor, because it takes a certain kind of training and a certain kind of discipline for someone else to sit down and be critical of a work in order to bring improvement to it. Many persons who really have training in English or literature can have a manuscript and not pay attention to the manuscript, or just hurriedly go through the manuscript. And at the end of the day, the manuscript is not improved in any way. The errors are there, stuff like that. And that's why I cannot rely on the judgment or competence of a single copy editor. And now one of the things I do with my copy editors is that if you return my manuscript to me without correction, I instantly suspect that you have not done your work. In many instances, because I use many copy editors, works have come from editors to me, and I've realized that editor A will see 1, 2, 3, and editor B will not see those things at all. Now, do I agree with my copy editors all the time? No. But it's important that they should point out stuff so that I can reevaluate them to be sure that the decision that I'm taking is a proper decision. Many writers, many poets, particularly the young ones, have a complex that prevents them from learning from the feedback mechanism that they can leverage on to improve on their art. So once they've created the poem, they believe that the poem is the best thing that has happened in the world. Once they've been able to string 1 or 2 stanzas together, they believe that that's the best that has ever happened in the world. And so when they come to people who are knowledgeable, really, really knowledgeable, who want to improve, make constructive, critical commentary that can help them improve their work, they are resistant to such commentary, entirely resistant to such commentary, because their default response is to argue that whatever they have done is well thought through, and that the criticism or feedback that they are getting from whoever is the reader or copy editor is misplaced. People like that cannot learn. People like that cannot get better at their art. So what does that mean? It simply means that when you set out to look for copy editors, you must look out for the copy editors you can trust. The people who just who don't have the integrity to do the work and also have the knowledge, the technical know-how to do the work, so that when they give you feedback, you can take the value of their commentary, of their feedback, as something that is important, and get towards the improvement of your art. Not every person, as I've said, can be a good copy editor. It's important that you should ask questions when you're looking for a copy editor. If you see a book and you read the book and you like the book, it is not out of place for you to find out from the author who was the editor and then give your work to that person. The other thing I tell people is that don't expect your copy editor to work for free, because the psychology of work is that whatever people are not paid for, they tend not to give their best to it. Now, and that's what I do even when I write essays, okay? And I have to get my friends who are in the university to help me edit. I insist on paying them. I may not pay them the market fee or the market price, but I insist that some payment must take place, because it is that payment that helps me to insist, to pull my string, that they must fulfill the task that I've asked them to do. But if you're not giving them anything, you're not paying anything, then you've already destroyed the psychology of work. Because human beings are wired not to pay really serious attention to work for which they are not paid. They don't feel that they owe you anything. So even if what you have to do is to buy your friend a plate of food, or buy your friend a bottle of beer, or give your friend money for a recharge card, assuming that your copy editor is your friend, it's significant. You must furnish a consideration that enables the person who is going to give you feedback look at the work. Now, I have spoken about two kinds of editing: your self-editing and your copy editing. These are necessary things that you must do before you present your work to a publisher. And it doesn't matter whether you're self-publishing the work or you have a traditional contract to publish the work. You must go through that thorough editorial process. You must take gatekeeping seriously. Now, many people think that self-publishing is the easy way out. Of course, most of the books that are published in Nigeria are self-published. I also think that is a global phenomenon. So instead of being on the waiting list of a publisher or being at the mercy of a publisher, particularly in a global book industry that doesn't pay too much attention to poetry, and that's the truth. Many publishers do not think that they understand the nobility of art that poetry represents, but they don't believe that poetry makes for commercial success, and they will rather invest their money in the forms that will help them make profit. So as difficult as that kind of system is, you see that it becomes a motivation for people who want to publish to just make easy recourse to self-publishing. But then the same thoroughness that is required of traditional publishing is required of self-publishing. So if you assume that you're the person who has to raise the money and take the sole decision about what the final outcome of your work is, and that entitles you to put a shoddy work out, then you have defeated yourself from the beginning. So whether you're going to have a traditional contract, or you're going to self-publish your work, or you're going to have a cost-sharing arrangement which will amount to subsidy publishing, you must self-edit your work. You must get a copy editor. Now, the second thing that happens is that, and many writers are disturbed by this when they have done self-editing and copy editing, and they have a traditional contract, and it turns out that the publisher who is giving them traditional contract is insisting that that work must go through another round of editing, and they are disturbed. But the truth is that no publisher that is worth his or her salt, who is going to invest in a book process, will take that book to press without subjecting that book to their own in-house editing mechanism. Okay. The final thing I want to talk about, because we're at the point of publishing now, is that you need to pay attention to the terms of your contract. It's a very big deal, so that you do not sign away your book, or sign away your intellectual property, or put your signature on a contract that you're going to regret, and then it will make you miserable for the rest of your career as a writer. Protect yourself. If you're going to sign a contract and you do not understand the terms of the contract, ask someone who understands it, or even get the service of a lawyer. There are lawyers everywhere in every family, and lawyers who are friends and all that. Leverage on their expertise and get your publishing contract in place in a way that serves your interest and also serves the interest of your publisher. Thank you. So I want to say a word about publishing. Why I think that's important for young poets who are creating art in Port Harcourt and all over the world to aspire to publishing their works. And of course, I know there are people who say that, well, I write for myself, I write for my friends, I write for my family, my intention is not to publish and stuff like that. Now, if you're very serious about that perspective, I respect that. But I strongly believe that it's important for young people who are producing art to make their work public. Publishing is a way of making your work public, making it more visible, making it more accessible to the people. For me, readership is important. I do not just write because I want to write poetry. I write because I want to reach out to the public. I want people to read my art. I want people to appreciate my art. I want my art to be part of a daily conversation. I've told people that I'm looking forward to an exciting day in my life when somebody who is making either a political speech or is preaching a sermon in church or running a motivational class is going to cite my poem in the course of his or her presentation. I mean, it's at that point that I know that my poetry is actually reaching out to the public. So if you have done your work properly, because that's where it starts from, you have to do your work properly. You have to do the due diligence of producing a work that has quality. If you have done that, do not be afraid to put your work out to the public. Let your work be visible and let the public enjoy the quality of your art. Visibility is one of the reasons why publishing is important. The other reason why publishing is important is the preservation of art. I run into a lot of young people who do not know where their poems are. They produce poems, but they don't keep them properly, and so they are scattered. And even the best keeper of works, we get to know that there are a lot of accidents that can happen in the lifetime of that artist that can make that artist lose works that are in a computer or in a notebook or in a file or stored in some other kind of device. The manuscript can be lost, the work can be lost, but publishing preserves art. So that is to say that it does not only preserve it for posterity, it also preserves it for you in case you see the need to do a second edition of the work because you're not impressed by one or two things. Your work is already preserved in the format that you can easily go to and work on it and improve it and represent it to the public. So publishing enhances the preservation of art. So if you come to a point where you do not have enough poems to form an anthology, you can do a chapbook. A chapbook can be a book of 10 poems or 15 poems or 20 poems, and they're there in the print format, okay? And they are preserved and accessible to the public. But beyond print, you can also publish in electronic format. There are all sorts of electronic formats that are available, platforms that are available that you can take advantage of, you can leverage on in order to make your work published and accessible. And when I mean electronic platforms, I'm also talking about things like starting your own blogs or using your social media platforms to publish your work. The risk there is that other persons can push those works, and if they end up publishing the works in some kind of medium or media before you, then ownership or authorship becomes contestable. So by all means, publish your work, take advantage of print technology or electronic technology. The third reason I want to give is there is a reason why creativity is referred to as intellectual property. And that reason is because every property is a definition of wealth in a way. Through the process of publishing your work, you can begin to earn a bit, even if what you earn is social stature that can enable you earn in some other ways. That's important. Okay? Your earning might not come directly from the sale of your book, but that book can give you the kind of stature that will enable you earn in other way. You build a social capital from publishing your book that can enable you earn from your creativity. That is one of the reasons why a book or a poem is defined as intellectual property. It is because it is supposed to position you on a scale of worth. And the more you produce, and the more the quality of what you produce, and the more you present them through publishing devices and increase the visibility and marketability of them, of those materials, the more the likelihood that you're going to make money from your work. If you realize I have not placed profit first, I have mentioned profit last, because I understand that no matter how much you are good at marketing, if you produce a work of bad quality, it is going to crash in your hands. So put quality first, put the creative process first. And when you have done your work properly, you shouldn't be ashamed to make profit from your work. Thank you for listening.